Ta-da! Good morning, everyone. This is Merlin. I'm coming to you live with your daily news digest, and hopefully everything's working fine, as this is very much the first one. So please let me know. I sadly cannot check the live comments at the same time because I have to monitor the live stream, so sorry about that. So for today's news, let's just start with kind of the most important parts of the topics. I have found quite a few interesting things. One of the first ones, let's start with something that happened in France. So the French president, Emmanuel Macron, has been speaking quite a lot about Lebanon, and specifically the fact that it's now been a year since the blast in Beirut, and nothing's been really happening in the country on the political scale. So he was quite annoyed about that. Well, annoyed is maybe an understatement, because he even used the term moral failure towards the political class within the country of Lebanon, who, for a reminder, is actually an old French colony. So he has quite a lot of, let's say, sway there. And because of this, he's been using a lot of that to just express the general discontent about the fact that the country still has not got a correct political system set up again. They have a president who's kind of like acting. They have a prime minister who's just been named again, and they still don't even have a board of ministers or any other real political group, if you want to call it that. So that was one. Another thing that happened, we're moving over to China this time. This is according to the Korea Times. So China has, specifically Chinese state media, has kind of toned down their criticism on video games, and specifically the video game industry. Notably, right after the stocks in Tencent, one of the major video game holders there, dropped quite a lot after a very wordy and strong article that was published a few days ago. Now, this has led to quite a lot of debate in the country, but the main thing is they have just said that basically the internet needs to be kept safe for minors, which is where the main concern came about the fact that minors didn't really have much protection when they were in the video game area, especially through online video games where there is open chats. Now, that brings us to a few sport events, which we can look at afterwards. But first, there is another thing that happened. This is from Russia Today. The representative of Russia to the United Nations was kind of backed on a few things here. But mainly, it's actually the one we need to look at is, I'm not going to massacre his name, the representative to the EU. Now, on his case, something that happened and was very important actually is the fact that he's been in talks with Brussels, so the headquarters of the EU, for quite a while now, and he's blaming them for politicizing the COVID-19 vaccines and the fact that they've been delaying this release of Sputnik 5 as an option within Europe, because although Russia was the first country to have proposed a virus counter, so a vaccine in this case, Sputnik 5, they were put into many loopholes of trials and etc. And there's been a lot of political debate around this, whether it was political or actually scientific. There's a very big debate open on that. Obviously, if you wanted to read more, I would very strongly recommend you read the extensive article on Russia Today. There's a lot of information that's going around there. Now, continuing in the COVID strain and what's been going on with the COVID line and etc. So a ship that was off the coast of Africa, Korean ship specifically, that was there on an anti-piracy mission, has had 272 sailors and soldiers serving on it who were infected with a very highly transmittable Delta variant of the COVID virus, and they had to be flown back to Korea because they needed better treatment. Now, this is according to the Korea Times again, and there were only 301 people on board, of which 272 got infected, and definitely it was quite complicated, and it was a situation where they had to be airlifted, etc., so their mission had to be cut short. So that's quite a big problem for the mission in general, and of course everything it represents. Now, continuing in the boat line and the ships and etc., India is very proud to hail their first aircraft carrier, which they have entirely built and sourced in their own country. So this is the first time that India has been able to design, build, construct, etc., and set sail their first own aircraft carrier, and it's now currently on the seas for its sea trials, as well as they say, as its maiden sea trials. Now, it's hailed as a historic and proud day for the country, where they've been really investing their own resources, their own time, and specifically their own efforts into really Indian-made technology, so not made from outside of the country, really their own. This is again published from Russia Today, and it's quite an interesting article actually, because they go through a lot of events about the fact that there was, of course, this time when the Indian minds left the country to go and study abroad, and then they wouldn't necessarily come back. Now they've been coming back a lot, and a lot of the externally learnt knowledge is being brought back into India, and it's really allowing the country to push through many boundaries that they used to have, one of which is the fact that now they're able to fully design their own technology and their own military technology as well, which is of course a remarkable fact. Continuing thus to one last thing about just general world news, the Greeks are told to remain alert as there is a lot of wildfire risk within Greece, because there is what they call a biblical heat wave there, because temperatures have been going above 40 degrees centigrade, that's 107 Fahrenheit, for 3 days in a row now, which is immense. And of course, there has been a lot of work from the firefighters to extinguish blazes that have been starting pretty much everywhere, on the islands, even on the mainland occasionally. And there's been a lot of problems with this, because basically no one can go out, no one can do anything, simply because the country's in too much of a heat problem. They literally, you cannot do anything. It's too hot, and that just leads the whole entire country into a very much state of chaos, I guess you would want to call it. Now, bringing us down to a few, let's just check if there's anything that's happened in the last couple seconds. Yep. US is developing a plan to require all foreign visitors to be vaccinated as soon as the travel bans are restricted towards the US. In other words, you will not be able to access the United States without being vaccinated. So that brings us back to the COVID vaccines, which there was actually another interesting topic about those. Quite recently in Korea, there was a very large problem where a lot of smaller townships were being scammed with apparent vials they were supposed to be able to get from Pfizer or one of the other ones, specifically Moderna as well, where these companies were telling them, yes, of course we can supply you, etc., etc. Turns out it was just a huge scam, and there's been a bit of political jumble there due to the fact that these people are being told off, not the companies who were scamming, of course, the mayors and so on who were accepting these scams, if you wish, instead of looking for better information. So they're kind of being told off, I guess, is the best way of putting it, for just not being aware enough, which is of course not really fair on them. And now, let's have a quick look at the Olympics. So there's two major injuries that have happened recently, and that's not exactly the nicest thing to talk about, but it's a very important part of the Olympics. Is, of course, it's been very hot there, and I'm sure you've all seen the fact that a lot of the athletes have been complaining about the fact that it's just too hot for them to compete correctly, and even some of the assistants and the people who, the ball fetchers and etc. I don't know the exact extensive terms for all the different sports, but they have all been suffering due to the heat, and this has made the entire Olympics actually very difficult for them. So there's a Belgian decathlete, Thomas van der Plasten, who's, his campaign for a first medal in the Olympics ever has definitely seemed to end it after he got injured whilst doing a very, very difficult long jump. And sadly, that kind of put an end to his entire performance here at the Olympics, here in Tokyo. And Katrina Johnson-Thompson pulls out of the heptathlon after injuring after an injury during the 200 meters this time. So that's according to The Independent, which, again, there's just so many injuries happening at the moment. There's just been so many troubles happening during these Olympic Games, from heat, from people getting injured, etc. It was already difficult enough to organize them. It's actually very sad to see that there's just continued troubles and difficulties that are going on. Now, to bring us to a little bit of positive news to wrap up for today, wildcats are returning to the Netherlands. And for anyone who doesn't know what wildcats are, those are a bit like domestic cats. They look almost the same. They're just a little bit taller on their legs and their faces are a bit more flat. So they're not just domestic cats that have gone wild. They're actually a kind of separate branch in the species. And they disappeared centuries ago, actually during the Middle Ages. And they were not found in any of the forests in the Netherlands. But thankfully, the local conservationists there have said that they've been returning, and there is a lot of hope that they will actually repopulate the now kind of renaturing forests of the southern part of the Netherlands, and thus, well, they bring hope that the country is actually going back to a more sustainable state. Because, of course, if the wildlife comes back, then that means the country's in a better state and is doing better. So just having a quick checkup to see if there's anything else of major importance that's been coming up. So there's a study on The Guardian that reckons that alcohol is linked to more cancers than thought. That's an interesting one to delve into, for sure. And apparently tear gas, well, this brings us back to Lebanon, tear gas and rubber bullets used against Lebanese protesters as they were demanding justice for the victims of the Beirut blast. So that's definitely something that brings us back to the situation where Emmanuel Macron was saying that there is no political class and that they aren't doing anything because they still don't have a full running government. Now, apparently the EU has signed a deal with Novavax for up to 200 million COVID-19 jabs so that they can have an even more diverse vaccine portfolio. That means that currently they're doing AstraZeneca, Moderna, Pfizer, and they'll be adding Novavax. So that's another one. And that's definitely quite a big shift because, of course, that gives more opportunity for people to get vaccinated. But, of course, it also just brings a better variety and so on. So that'll wrap us up for today. I'm trying to keep this as short as possible. Please tune in tomorrow morning at 7:45 for the next live. I will hopefully have these episodes having better quality on video soon. I need to figure out how to change that. If you like what you hear and if you like this sort of format, please feel free to share. It will help me a lot. Feel free to just tell your friends that they can tune in at this time. Of course, these will all be available on replay as well. And